Hello, welcome to the Lucidity Insights podcast. And I'm so excited today because I've got Chris Barton with me. If you're unfamiliar with that name, I can guarantee you that you know the product that he helped put on your phones and to millions of others. It's been downloaded over 2 billion times. Chris Barton is the founder and first CEO of Shazam. Welcome, Chris. Super excited to have you here.
Thanks, Erica. Thanks to have me.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. And thanks for downloading Shazam.
Yeah, well, I've had it forever, I think, since the first App Store came out. And so let's start there. I'm super excited about this whole Shazam story because as I started digging into it, I thought there's going to be a Netflix documentary on this soon.
I'm working on that.
Are you?
I also thought, because I've seen one on BlackBerry, one on Spotify, and one on Tetris, and I'm like, you know what? We need one on Shazam.
100%. And I think it's a fantastic story. And one of the reasons why I think it's fantastic is actually because I think Shazam was way ahead of its time. Mm-hmm. It was founded in the year 2000. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is the time when Silicon Valley was going through its big dot-com bubble.
Yeah.
And let me put this in perspective for everyone. Shazam was established 7 years before the first iPhone came out. Mm-hmm. The smartest phone at the time was probably the BlackBerry. It could do email, but not a whole lot else. The most popular phone was a Nokia, so you could only make calls on it or text message. Shazam was invented 3 years before iTunes launched, or at least established. Let's not say invented, but established. Mm-hmm. 6 years before Spotify and 1 year before the iPod. Mm-hmm. So this is a really different time. We didn't know what an app store was.
Right.
We didn't know what an app was. You didn't know what an app was.
Yeah.
And so take me back to that time, Chris. Year 2000, you said, hey, with a couple of MBA buddies, wouldn't it be cool to have a company or, some kind of technology that could identify a song from your phone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, because by the way, on that note, someone once said to me, you invented an app 8 years before apps existed. And when I said that to me, I had never thought of it that way. And I'm like, whoa, that is crazy. I never really, that's an interesting way to think of it, because obviously I didn't think of it as an app at the time. There were no apps. But so at the time, what was happening is if you saw a graph of what percentage of people had mobile phones, just a couple years before I came up with the idea for Shazam, it might have been 40 or 50% of people. And a couple years after I came up with the idea of Shazam, it was maybe 70 to 90%. So it was on this incredible rocket where just suddenly everyone was getting mobile phones. Their first mobile phone.
Kind of like the smartphone ramp up, the internet ramp up, or you can now say the ChatGPT ramp up as well.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just it was on this incredible ramp, and it was just becoming, in just a few years earlier, it had been like a luxury item to have a mobile phone that only kind of people that really needed it for business purposes would have it. And then now this is the period where suddenly just everyone was getting them because it just made sense. And so I could see that, and I was in business school doing my MBA at Berkeley, and I really genuinely, the first step was thinking I want to start a company. So I went over that hurdle, and we can get to that if you like, but I went over that I crossed that chasm of I want to start a company.
I love that because you were actually a strategy consultant before, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And then you went to business school thinking you were going to be on partner track, but
I think I don't know what I was thinking exactly, but I just knew that all management consultants were told to get to the next level you have to have an MBA. So I guess it's time to get an MBA, and right. But I definitely didn't go to business school thinking I'm going to start a company. I had this sort of aha moment of thinking I want to start a company that I can get into if you're interested in that, but on Shazam, it was when I was in the brainstorming mode of, okay, what will this company be? And that was one of the things that was key, in addition to this whole moment of, wouldn't it be great to know what that song is? I was also just thinking, gosh, all these people are just carrying mobile phones around. Everyone, we're all carrying mobile phones around. And what's amazing, because these phones are with us wherever we go. And I knew that, of course, we're making phone calls and sending text messages, but I really was genuinely fascinated by, wow, what an opportunity. What could I come up with that we could do on phones, right? And again, no one else was thinking that way because, again, there was no app store, right? So there would be no reason to think that. Like, a phone literally just could make phone calls and send text messages. And as I joke in my speech, and you could play Snake if it was a Nokia phone. But that was it, right? And so there was no reason to think you should be able to do anything else on a mobile phone. Actually, I should mention there were two other things that were innovations at the time. One was ringtones, and there were companies that literally were ringtone companies started by entrepreneurs, and they were just making it so you could download the actual way your phone rang, monophonic ringtones. And then the second thing was there were some companies that did sports scores where you get the text message and it would say, oh, the Warriors just won the game or whatever. But that was it. So that was the extent of all innovation on mobile phones.
And for those people that are listening or watching that don't know what Snake is, it's a really basic Tetris-like game, right? That we were like, whoa, cool, we could do this on our really basic phones. That was not a smartphone. Yeah.
Right. That was it. Just this little snake going around your screen. But that was it. And so I was thinking, gosh, what if we can come up with something else? So it was the combination of these two problems. One being like all these phones that there's nothing else to do other than calls and text messages and Snake. And then the second one, this thing of, wow, what is that song kind of thing?
Yeah.
So that those two problems came together and led to an initial idea for Shazam, which was not the breakthrough idea. Should I get into that?
Yeah. So, first of all, let's hold up there. What I find interesting about the Shazam story is that you also had two other co-founders at the beginning, which ended up being, there was 4 of you in total at the end, but 2 others, both of them from your MBA program.
No, one of them from my MBA.
Oh, one.
Yeah.
Where was
Philippe from Belgium was in my MBA class at Berkeley. Dheeraj had done his MBA at the GSB in Stanford a couple years before. So he was off working in kind of an internet consulting firm.
And you guys just were friends?
Yeah, we're just friends. Yeah.
Okay. So you found these guys to come together, and you guys started the quintessential Silicon Valley way, I would say, where a bunch of business-minded guys come together and say, let's start a company together, let's have fun. And then you had to go find your tech guy later when you figured out what you wanted to do. But I want to zoom in on that moment where you're having chats with Philippe and Dheeraj, and you go, I think we should do this Shazam company or it's not even a company at that point, but this business idea around, Shazamming a song.
Yeah.
Initially, did they both go, yeah, that's great? Was it an easy convince?
It was not. It was easy, but then hard. So it was easy in the sense oh, that sounds like a cool idea, they said. But then because we then very quickly discovered that there was no technology. See, initially we thought, oh, we'll just go find the technology to do this.
Yeah.
And then as we went out and talked to all these experts, it soon became apparent there was no technology that could do it. And then we thought, well, we'll just find someone who's an expert in that area and a PhD, and then they'll just build it for us.
Right.
And that's what's so interesting is that in most startups, you have some idea and then you just build it. I mean, if you think about it, Snapchat, it's not like you had to invent something. You just built a disappearing message, right?
Right.
And Facebook, you didn't have to invent anything. You just built a social network. So, I mean, even with Google, with PageRank, they were just, we're just going to make it so the search algorithm is based on links between websites,
Right.
So none of these things are like rocket science once you have the idea. But in this case, our idea is it's a little bit more comparable to saying we're going to cure this cancer, right? And it's well, how are you going to do it? And so there was no technology that could do it, and there was also no expert PhD audio signal processing person that said, yeah, I could build that for you.
Right.
So that's at that point when we realized that there definitely was concern, I would say, from my co-founders of, wait, hold on, we're building a company using a technology that we haven't invented and no one knows how to invent.
And a lot of people you're talking to, all these professors around the U.S. are telling you that specialize in this, it might be impossible.
Yeah.
And so that's what's interesting to me. You bring on Mike Avery, Avery Wang,
yeah.
That says, yeah, I'm willing to give it a shot. Mm-hmm. But even at this point, you bring him on as a co-founder, and you've said he actually didn't believe that it could be done.
He literally he tells me this story still to this day, where after months of trying, he was worried. He just thought that it can't be done. He just couldn't do it. And he was working in partnership with professor from Stanford, but they're both PhDs in audio signal processing, and they couldn't come up with a method. And he thought, oh, how am I going to let Chris and Philippe and Dheeraj down? Because basically, I'm not going to be able to invent this algorithm that they need to start this whole company that I'm the fourth co-founder of. And it's going to be a big disappointment because they have this whole startup they want to build, and it's just, if I don't do it, it can't be built.
It's so interesting. Can you talk us a little bit through the technological challenges? I've heard you talk about, at the time, phones actually would magnify human voices instead of ambient noise and these sort of things. What were some of those challenges that he had to build an algorithm to solve?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, the best way to think about it is that it's pattern recognition. I mean, think of it like this way. When you go through an airport and sometimes it says stand in front of the camera and then, open your eyes, take your glasses off, and then it recognizes you, right? Okay, and then that's pretty amazing. It knows who you are and says, yeah, you can go through the passport control. Well, this is Shazam. It's a bit like doing that, except saying, oh, but you don't have to stand in front of the camera. You can be moving around, and you can be in a crowd of about hundreds of other people wearing glasses if you want, and maybe one eye is closed, and it has to be able to work in all those situations, right?
Yeah.
And maybe one day we'll get there. By the way, maybe we'll just walk into in the future. We'll just walk into an airport, and some camera will recognize us somewhere in the crowd and go, "Yep, that's that person," and you won't have to stand directly in front of the camera. But that's kind of what we were doing with Shazam, because there's all these challenges. It wasn't just like a nice, clean... See, there was actually technology at the time that did recognize songs if they were nice, clean signals being played on the radio, and you had a nice, small database of radio songs only, which is about 100,000 songs, and you had these nice, clean signals of the sound, and they matched them up. There were technologies that already did that, and you'd think, oh, that's music recognition. Great. Can't you just make that a little bit more robust? But no, you couldn't. I mean, because it would work with that. But when you introduce all these challenges that we faced, noise, so one being noise, so background noises, could be people talking in a bar, could be the wind as your window is open and you're driving a car, whatever it may be. It could be that you're watching a TV show and there's music, but also the actors are talking. So that's noise that's overlaying with the music. Then you also have noise cancellation technologies. So on every mobile phone manufacturer at the time, including Nokia, Motorola, you name it, built technologies that... They tried to make the sound quality for voice conversations better, so they were noise cancellation technologies. So they were built to enhance the sound of the human voice and de-emphasize all other sounds, such as music. So when you talked and had a conversation, it tried to block all the background noises, but sometimes that is the music. And then you also had DJs changing the speed of music. You had the speakers themselves, which are not always great quality, and they're sort of staticky sounding, and then you have the effect in an auditorium with an echoey type feeling. So all these types of things would just distort the quality of the signal, and so the signal-to-noise ratio was often horrendous that we had to deal with. But we wanted to make something that would work everywhere, So, I mean, most places where music is out there, we wanted to make it work. So that made for a lot of challenges.
I can just imagine Avery kind of coming up across one by one, just, I don't want to say failing, but these are massive hurdles to overcome. And in the whole Shazam story, it just feels like that. Like you come across this idea, great, you go forwards, okay, I see you building it one step at a time, just putting one foot in front of the other. You find Avery, sorry. You get all these people to try and build this for you, but it must have been you must have had some kind of perseverance, conviction, and on top of that, I want to ask you, because these days you speak to a lot of investors and they say, yeah, it's a nice to have idea, might make a lot of people smile, but what problem are you really solving? Mm-hmm. Did you come across that issue when you were pitching to investors and trying to convince them that this was this was something big?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a typical investor was not the person you imagined using Shazam. So especially the investors where we were starting, which was in London. So most venture capitalists in London were typically kind of retired investment bankers and very finance-oriented. They wanted to see your financial projections and so on, but convincing them that everyone wants to use their phones to identify songs, and that's going to be an entire business in it of itself, was very hard to do. So I tell the story of how one big venture investor watched the demo and he literally said, I don't see why anyone would ever use that. And, it's interesting. I still can remember that exact experience so well because it will be forever marked in my memories. We were in a boardroom of this venture capital firm. When he said that, I kind of thought for a moment, and I said, okay, well, I knew that he had quite a few employees outside the conference room. I said, let's go out this room right now, and we're going to go to the desks of all those people, and we're going to just ask them, would they use this? And it was really not really an appropriate thing to do, especially in
ballsy.
Especially in conservative London, where he was an ex-Goldman Sachs investment banker, and so he kind of was put off by that a little bit. He sort of paused, and then he said, well, I guess there's a large market for Barbie dolls, and I would never buy a Barbie doll. And I thought that was insightful that he said that. Then the next thing he said is, he said, I wish the entrepreneurs I've funded had that kind of oomph, because it was like, oh yeah, well I'm going to take you on. But anyway, no, we didn't convince him to invest that investor, but
and
yeah.
How did you respond? Were there investors that came on board that really was like, this is worth investing in? Also, I want to ask, because at that time, as you said, they were ex-bankers.
Yeah.
And what was your path to profitability? What was the pitch in terms of this is a business that's going to make money? This was before ads. This was before all of that stuff.
Yeah, the original pitch, our original idea for how we were going to make money was actually a brilliant idea. And we would have made a lot more money than we make today even. It's just that it didn't quite work. Tell us about it. Because basically our original way we made money, because there was you couldn't sell music, there was no downloadable music.
Yeah.
You couldn't do advertising, which we later did, because there's no apps, so there's no visuals, no graphical user interface. It's just a text message. So people are identifying songs. Just to be clear for the listeners, they're dialing a phone number, and then we record the sound and then send a text message with the name of the song back to their caller ID, to their phone.
So just to be clear, the first Shazam version, you'd have a Nokia phone, you'd be in a bar, and you would actually have to have a number maybe saved or something.
Yeah.
And you would dial this number, hold up your phone for like 20 seconds, and then hang up.
It would hang up on you.
It would hang up.
Yeah.
And a few minutes later, I would get a text message.
No, not minutes later, like a second later.
A second later, I would get a text message.
Yeah.
And was this pay per use?
Yeah, and so that's why I say it could have been a huge business because back then we had borrowed that business model idea from the incumbent equivalents at the time, which is like 411 directory inquiries. I don't know if you recall, we used to all dial 411 and say, "What's the number for Domino's Pizza?" And they'd say, "It's this number," and then you get charged 50 cents on your phone bill. And so we did that. We put those kind of things in place with partnerships with carriers, and it's called premium text messaging. So basically, it's a text message that comes to your phone, but also it's accompanied by a charge to your mobile phone bill. So each time you use Shazam, we would use premium text messaging to charge your phone 50 pence, the UK equivalent of cents, 50 pence. Each time you use Shazam, if we successfully identified the song. If we couldn't identify it, you get a text message saying, sorry, we couldn't identify it, and that one would be no charge.
That's amazing. And why didn't it work?
Now, let me just tell you, so in that 50 pence, about roughly a little bit less than half goes to the mobile carrier, so we'll just call it 25 pence, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you take the number of Shazams that we have per month today and multiply that times 25 pence, Shazam would be making hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue per month, right? I mean, it would have been so basically, and this is what we showed. We showed venture capitalists these PowerPoints saying, look, if we get this many people, I think we said like 6% of mobile phone users will use Shazam once a week. Well, if you have 6% of all mobile phone users in the world using Shazam once a week and you're getting 25 cents each time, that's a lot of money. Basically, it's a lot of money. And so, it's too bad it didn't turn out. Now, of course, like all things, they eventually become free, right?
Yeah.
And so it all became free, and then our business model changed to helping sell iTunes songs, and we sold over $300 million a year of iTunes songs, and taking affiliate on that, and doing all kinds of things. Advertising became our biggest business model. So everything evolved in the future, but that was our original vision. So
I love that. So that was what was in the original pitch.
That was the original pitch. And so our original pitch, it did say, we're going to make hundreds of millions of dollars.
Okay, so there was a real commercial strategy there.
Yeah.
The other piece that I thought was so interesting, and I don't think we see enough these days, is that you guys, and you, I think primarily, cold called a number of prominent business people at the time to be angel investors. I think for your first couple $100,000 or something you brought into the business, you had a couple former chairmen of record labels. You had British Telecom, I think.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about that and what kind of approach you took on that, and did they really deliver?
Okay, so this is one of my creative persistence ideas. As I'm thinking, okay, well, I've never started a company. I've never been the leader of a company. And now I'm going to convince these people called venture capitalists who have millions of dollars to give me millions of dollars and trust me with it to build this business that, and make it scale and everything. So how am I going to convince them? How am I going to get the credibility to do this? And then I thought, I know if I get the angel investors, rather than just getting angel investment money, I'm going to get angel investment money from that bring credibility. And it really works, by the way. The people that we ended up getting, and then I'll tell the story, included the former chairman of EMI, and there's five or six major record labels at the time. I think it was 6, and so EMI is one of them, along with Universal Music, Sony, BMG, and Warner. So anyway, he was the former chairman of EMI. He invested. And I cold called him basically, and just literally.
And he just met you.
And he just took a meeting and told him about Shazam, and he loved it, because I was a music guy. Then we got the chairman of BMG, former chairman of BMG, another one of the major record labels. We got the chief technology officer of British Telecom. Again, we were in London at the time. So, and all these people, I would just find them. Literally find them, cold call them, and then convince them, meet them, and then convince them to put a little bit of their money in. I mean, it wasn't a lot. It was like they'd put in $20,000-$30,000. But then later, when I went to the venture capitalists, I'd say, "Here's our investors," and they would see former chairman of EMI, former chairman of BMG, founder of Liquid Audio, CTO of British Telecom, and so on. And that really opened their eyes, and they kind of thought, "Wow, there's got to be something here."
Yeah. Impressive, and even the story of you just cold calling. If you ever got to tell a VC that, I think they would be like, "Okay, this guy's hireable. Or he's okay.
He's a go-getter."
Yeah, we can give him some of our.
Can
cash.
I tell you my favorite story from that?
Yeah,
I just have to tell you this, because this is the guy that didn't invest. But so one of the largest mobile phone companies in the world is a company called Vodafone.
Yeah.
You've probably heard of it. And so Vodafone it's all over the world. There's Vodafones in many countries, but it was started in the United Kingdom. And I knew this. I thought, gosh, I would love to have a big mobile phone person as well. We have all these music people. I'd like a mobile phone person. And so I looked up on the internet, and I turned out Vodafone. At the time, Vodafone was a public company, and I was living in London, and you buy the Financial Times, which is equivalent of the Wall Street Journal, and they would say, like, the CEO of Vodafone, Chris Gent, is doing this and that. It was a big, big, high-profile company. And I thought, I want to get not just Chris Gent, the CEO of Vodafone, I want to get the founder of Vodafone as an investor. So I Google it, and I find this guy, I think it was Jerry Wentz, I think was his name, and I find he's the founder of Vodafone. So then I do all this searching, and I find his home phone number. Literally, on the internet, I find his home phone number, okay? And so then I call him at home, okay? And I literally call him on his home phone at home, and I just say, he answers the phone, and he's like retired at this time. And I said, "Hi, my name's Chris Barton, and I'm starting a company in music recognition, and I would be really interested to see if you might be an angel investor since you have a background in mobile phones." And he said, "Oh no," he said, "I know about those angel investment things, but no, I don't like doing those things at all. I'm not interested at all." He was kind of like, and then I said, "Well, but I always take this opportunity. I think all entrepreneurs should do this. It's like, don't just give up there. See what other value you could maybe get there." So I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, is there anyone you can think of that would be a good investor from Vodafone potentially?" And he said, "Well, how about Chris Gent? He's the CEO of Vodafone." And I'm thinking, for some reason, that scared me more because Chris Gent was the CEO and he's on the front page of the Financial Times every day. So I said to him, "Well, Chris Gent," I said, "but he's the CEO of Vodafone. I mean, I can't go to him. He's going to be so busy." And then Jerry said, "No, I used to be the CEO of Vodafone, and it's not that much work."
I love that.
Like, great, yeah. So anyway,
gosh. Did you end up getting him?
I didn't end up getting to Chris Gent, the CEO of Vodafone.
So
no,
you didn't talk to him either.
I didn't even talk to him, but I just love the guy's humor. It's not that much work. He's just CEO of Vodafone.
He's just the CEO. So, okay, you've got this amazing army of angel investors that, some of them are some pretty big names. I assume they're giving you some really interesting advice as well. Did they open some doors?
They opened some doors. They definitely open doors and give some insights and feedback. But it wasn't like game changing for us necessarily. Like we actually didn't successfully get licenses with any of the record labels at the time. They all wanted to be paid big guarantees, and so we went a route where we didn't need licenses.
What about British Telecom?
British Telecom isn't, well, they have, their mobile phone company was sort of a separate company. It became O2, so that didn't really help things. It was more about credibility. It was about credibility. So, like, for example, we did need partnerships with all 4 major mobile phone companies to launch, because it turns out that phone number that you dial, it was a 4-digit number, 2580, and to get a 4-digit number as your phone number, you have to have a partnership with a mobile phone company, because they control those, what are called short codes. And so there's 4 major mobile operators in the UK, and we needed that number on all 4 mobile operators. So we had to have 4 separate partnerships with all 4 major, Vodafone, Orange, T-Mobile, and O2, to get this number 2580 from all of them. And if one of them said, no, you can't have 2580, of course, that would be a disaster, because now we'd have like different phone numbers on different carriers. So that was
super interesting. It kind of reminds me of some of the fintechs now going through that, having to partner with certain banks, to break in. I love this. Okay. And so through this process, you then manage a year later to get some VCs to actually give you some real seed money. Yeah. $7.5 million.
That was our Series A. Yeah.
That was your Series A.
That was our Series A. We had raised up to $1 million, roughly about $1 million in our angel round as a bridge loan, and then our Series A was $7.5 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this $7.5 million, what were you pitching and saying we're going to use this for?
To build a commercially launchable service.
At this point, had you?
No, we had not.
When you raised it, you didn't have a product out there that people were paying for.
No, see, that's the big difference between today and back then. Today, you can launch and do a lot of stuff with a small amount of money, and investors expect it as well. They want to see what have you put out there. Back then, there's no way we could have launched Shazam for $1 million. There's just no way. I mean, we had the amount of heavy lifting we had to do to create. Remember, there's no Amazon Web Services, so we built our own search engine. We bought a bunch of PCs and wired them together, created a Beowulf cluster supercomputer from scratch. There was no music databases. We built our own music database from scratch by taking all the CDs that were available for sale in the entire United Kingdom and then turning them into a digital database and typing all the names of every song, every artist, every album title. We did deals with all 4 mobile operators where we deeply integrated into their, so that we'd have a phone number with each of them, as well as text message return path with premium SMS. We did a deal with a premium SMS company so that we can charge phones and share the revenue. I mean, just the amount of things. We had 30 employees all working for like a year to build this thing to launch. And so, it required way more than $1 million.
Okay. And so that $7.5 million was to realize this ultimate vision.
Yeah.
When you came to them, what did you have? You had the algorithm.
When we came to the venture capitalists, we basically had an algorithm that we showed on a computer. I think we did have a way we could use dial a phone number, actually. So I think we set up a very simple thing where you could dial a phone number and it would identify a song from a phone. And then we had a tiny it was running off a very small database. So if you did this, it had to be one of like 3,000 songs that were in our database, and then you would Shazam one of those songs, And so actually one of the big fears I remember of our venture capitalists when they decided to invest is, well, it might work on 3,000 songs. They hired some pattern recognition experts, and they said, well, be careful, because there's a lot of pattern recognition that might well work on 3,000, but is it going to work on 3 million, right? So it usually often fails then. So they actually had to do a lot of due diligence around trying to academically assess whether our algorithm would scale at very large numbers of songs.
Wow. And then we enter a period of time that Shazam had many near-death experiences, it sounds like. 2002 to 2008 until the App Store was launched. Walk us through that time. How did you guys survive? How many users did you have?
Yeah, the users would have been very small. I mean, so for context, like today, it's had over 2 billion downloads. There's over 300 million monthly active users of Shazam today. But during all that time, our total users would have been in the, monthly active users would have been in the thousands, 10,000s, no more than 100,000, So very small numbers for the entire time. Nowhere near what you need to have a viable business from a revenue perspective.
You guys are burning cash.
Burning cash the whole time. And I forgot your question now. What was it?
The near-death experience
Yeah,
is how you guys survived.
How we survived. So we barely had any users. So we started to. It's funny. I was just writing a little kind of potential post or something about this, or a little quote. But I think when a startup hits hard times, or actually any company hits hard times, but particularly a startup, what you normally do is you start cutting costs, controlling costs, because I'm really struggling here. So you reduce costs, and then maybe you even seek more funding, right? Those are your two things. You got to somehow stay alive.
Yeah.
Right? But there's one more thing, because this was not just a problem for us for a few months or a year, right? It's not just like a little bridge financing kind of thing. This is like 6 years that we had to do to survive. So what we did is we got very creative about finding other revenue streams. And so Shazam, we did all kinds of interesting things to bring money in the door. We created a technology for old Samsung phones before smartphones that we licensed to them. They put it on millions of Samsung phones, and it was back then. In those days, people would take MP3 files on an old phone and they put it onto the phone with like a cable, and so they could have music on their phone. But the problem is those MP3s were often incorrectly labeled, and so you couldn't actually see what songs were on your phone.
Yeah.
So our technology would identify what they were and correct the labeling.
Oh, wow.
So that was a Samsung deal. We did another deal where we created, before the world of apps, we created like a native app, they called it, for Motorola phones. So you could think of it as like an early version of apps, a very simple app made with code custom for Motorola phones. Before there were app stores, you couldn't download apps, but they did build these basic apps, kind of like Snake, I guess you could say, was a basic app. And so we built a Moto ID, a white label version of Shazam called Moto ID that was preloaded on millions of Motorola phones, and they would pay us a licensing fee for that. We did another one for AT&T like that. That was preloaded on AT&T phones. And then we also built a B2B business where we monitored. We turned out the technology that we had created. Remember I mentioned there was radio recognition.
Yes.
Well, it turns out we then realized, oh my gosh, our technology for radio recognition is way more effective, scalable, and cost efficient. And so we went in and displaced the existing radio recognition companies and became radio recognition for people that needed to know what was playing on the radio, because many people don't realize, but there's giant royalty societies that collect money from radio stations and then distribute it to artists, and they have to know what's playing on the radio. So that also was a new business we built. Now, none of these things brought us all the way to profitability, but when you add all these things up, another one, we sold an exclusive license of our technology to a company for the purposes of running a future Shazam in Japan. So we basically sold Japan.
Wow.
We're like, here, give us $500,000 and we'll give you Japan, or something like that, Right?
And so Shazam doesn't work in Japan?
No, it's so outdated now, but I don't even know how much money it was. But basically it was, some amount of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars probably, that we brought in. And in return, we said, here, you get to launch Shazam in Japan. But, this is way before there were apps, right?
Yeah.
So it's not even relevant now. So that never happened. They never launched it, I think.
This is so insightful, because I think most people look at Shazam as it's on their phone now, and most people look at most products and companies, right? And they go, yeah, this is what it started out as. And here you are naming multiple different business models just to survive the first 8 years of the business.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And then 2008, the App Store is launched. I remember when it was launched, and I didn't understand what it was. So I was like, I don't understand what this is supposed to be. Now we look at this and go, of course, like we've had it all this time. And it basically saves Shazam. Mm-hmm. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And what was interesting is suddenly the world's most incredible companies are approaching us. So let me tell you this. So first, who launched the App Store? It was Apple, right? Yeah. And when they launched the App Store, they wanted to showcase how incredible the App Store was. So they had a team of people that brainstormed what kind of things will be our first apps when we launch the App Store. And they would approach like video game companies and say, can you build a little video game for mobile phones? Here's our app framework here. And so they approached Shazam, and they knew we existed. And they said,
how did they know you existed?
Because we were out there. It's not like we're off the radar completely.
Yeah.
In fact, when I joined Google in 2004, I remember learning that they were aware of Shazam as well. That Larry and Sergey were aware, because we would get out in the press, and it was in the area of pattern recognition. So people knew it existed. It's just that it wasn't like taking off, right? So So Apple approached Shazam and said, "Can you build an app version of what you have, the phone number and text message, and here's an app, and it will be in our initial app store at launch." Which, by the way, back then there were like a total of 1 million or less iPhones in the whole world, right? I mean, that was the early days, but still, it was like an incredible opportunity.
And do you remember how many apps they had when they launched?
I don't know, but it's just minuscule. We'll call it 1,000 apps or 300 apps. I mean, some small number.
Yeah.
But they wanted to showcase the cool things that that the Apple iPhone could do. Another thing they did, which was so amazing, that was life-changing for Shazam, is they then, in the next year or so, they then picked about 6 apps out of what was probably a few thousand apps by that point, and they decided, we're going to showcase these to help sell the iPhone. And they made these dedicated 30-second TV commercials, one for each app, and then ran their own TV campaigns, and one of them was just about Shazam. So you would sit there and watch national TV, and then suddenly an ad would come on and say, "Here's an app called Shazam, and it identifies songs." And the whole commercial, and at the very end it said, "The iPhone," and whatever.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and I've read somewhere that you guys never once paid for advertising.
Yeah, that's right. We never. I mean, there was a time in the very early days when we first launched as a phone number text message service. We did have a head of marketing. We did have a little bit of a marketing budget because back then there were no apps, so we had to get the word out there. Back then we did spend money on marketing. It didn't work, frankly. So we ran. We had billboards, TV, radio ads. We even hired people to walk into bars and tell people about Shazam, and all this stuff. But sometimes the economics of marketing just don't work, right? So you're spending all this money on marketing, and then someone uses Shazam, and you make 25 cents,
yeah,
right? And it just simply doesn't work. So later, that just didn't work. But later, we did white labeling and licensing, as I said, to survive. And then as an app, now suddenly it was just like really easy to discover Shazam, and everyone could tell each other about it and download it. And we were just remained in the top most popular apps, and it was all just word of mouth. So Shazam just grew through word of mouth, and for many years we were consistently getting, and we probably do today, getting about 8 million downloads per month, just all without any marketing, just word of mouth, people telling each other about Shazam.
Unbelievable. Yeah, 8 million downloads per month without any advertising. I mean, yeah, network effects.
It's a dream come true. But it's actually, I just want to clarify, actually, it's not network effects. That's the amazing thing.
Well, yeah, it's just word of mouth.
Yeah,
isn't
it's
it?
word of mouth. So this is often a misunderstanding. So I always like to say a network effect is like it's defined as when you use the service, you're inherently introducing someone new to it. So text messaging or even Hotmail. If you emailed someone, they're seeing Hotmail. If text messaging, you send a text message, they receive a text message.
So it would be network effects if I Shazammed a song and then I shared that Shazam
with somebody else.
But that wasn't possible then.
Yeah, it wasn't possible, and it never. We did have share later, but it never became significant.
Yeah.
So really, it was just honestly word of mouth. And by the way, Google's word of mouth as well. There's no network effect with Google search. It was Google search in those early days was just people saying, "Hey, there's this great search engine. It's so much better than Yahoo or whatever, Excite or whatever." And so people just told each other about it.
Unbelievable. And so it skyrockets, and I want to take you to the 2018 acquisition of Shazam by none other than probably the company that helped put a rocket pack on it, Apple, for a reported $400 million. How shocking was that, or how obvious was that acquisition for you guys? Were you guys expecting it?
Well, we definitely were. We were expecting to be acquired because consciously. There's two ways of being acquired. Essentially, one is when you get an unsolicited approach from some big company, right, which does happen certainly, and then the other is when you decide to go out and sell yourself, and that's what we had done. So we had hired Goldman Sachs to take Shazam out and make it, to have private conversations with multiple companies, and then someone would buy Shazam. And so any company that was a logical potential acquirer of Shazam was probably seeing that opportunity, right? So you can just think of different companies that would be interested in buying Shazam. They would all find out about it. It's a very professional process. I was so impressed seeing how Goldman Sachs worked in this whole process. So they kind of make you ready, sort of prepare you and so on for sale. But the interesting part is the part of who actually buys you, right? Because you don't know how that will play out.
It's a bit of a blind dating situation.
And it's like all different companies are looking for different things, right? Most of these this is a strategic acquisition, right? So it's not you're not selling yourself just for your revenues. You're looking to sell yourself because you're strategically beneficial to some company. And so the strategic benefits of Shazam to Google is different than it is to Facebook, and it's different than it is to Amazon, it's different to Spotify, and different to Apple, because they're each trying to achieve different things. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of an interesting part of it. I did know it was always my dream that Shazam would be bought by Apple. I mean, there's no doubt. Even if you had asked me years before the acquisition and said, if there was one company you would love to buy your company, who would it be? I would just say Apple, number one.
And back then, they were making a lot of acquisitions.
Yeah, and even today. So even to this day, it's known that Apple very rarely makes large acquisitions. So that's what I kept hearing from the venture capitalists is, look, Chris, Apple really doesn't buy companies, and it's really true. I mean, they build stuff in-house. I mean, if you look at, actually, there's no other, you can look at your entire iPhone and look at every single app that is made by Apple and ask yourself, who did they buy? And they didn't buy any of them. They made them all, right? Even Apple Maps, right? They make them all.
I think it's a testament to the beginning of Shazam's journey and how challenging the technology was, perhaps. And yeah, I'm amazed by the Shazam story. It's definitely going to be a documentary at one time. If you go back and think about the whole journey, would you change anything?
I think the biggest thing that I would change is I would have put the pedal down earlier on these ancillary revenue streams that we went after. So that I meant specifically the one that was the best one for us was that B2B one of monitoring radio stations. And this is actually a great lesson for entrepreneurs, I think, because as an entrepreneur, you often have a vision, right? And so my vision was definitely not, I want to monitor radio stations for royalty societies. That was definitely not what I was.
Super sexy.
Right. It was not. But the lesson that I learned is that did bring in a good, significant revenue stream that then became, honestly, probably the main reason that we survived. We wouldn't have even been around to be there for the App Store otherwise. And if we had done it earlier, then we would have had less crushing dilutive rounds with venture capital firms to stay alive. And so I think that's a really, and I always like to point out the Google story. They did that when they first hired Omid Kurdistani as their head of all sales organization. The first thing he did is a deal with Yahoo where he said, we're going to power Yahoo search. And Google's early revenues in the very early days was basically one big check from Yahoo. And that was so critical because it funded the company in those early years when you need the money. And then later, of course, that became relevant and they built a whole business. But I think it can't be underemphasized how amazing that can be for an entrepreneur as a strategy is even if you're sort of not doing because I guarantee you, Larry and Sergey, their passion was not to power Yahoo search. But sometimes you just have to kind of do what it takes to stay alive. I like to compare it to like the scuba diver with the tank of oxygen, right? Oxygen is like revenue is like oxygen, and you just need oxygen because if that oxygen runs out, that's it, game over for the scuba diver.
Yeah.
And it's same for the entrepreneur. If that revenue is not there to sustain your business, it can be game over. And so I now have learned how important that is, that early revenue, even if it means doing things that are not really the priority of the business.
It's such a story of perseverance. It's a story of a technology that I don't know if it needed to be invented. I certainly have benefited from it. It's given me a lot of joy. But it was way, way before its time. And so as a final piece of advice, if there's someone out there sitting on a beautiful business idea and they know that they're slightly early, what's your advice to them?
I think it's a good thing to be slightly early because, the bad part about it is...
How early were you? When you look back at Shazam, you were 6 years early.
Yeah, we were way too early. That was scary. The ideal thing would be like a year or two early, rather because how are you going to survive all that time? But I think that some of the best entrepreneurial strategies are to be really early, but have another way of supporting the business and yourself, so that you can kind of have a long runway, right? So maybe you have a startup company and you're a strategy consultant,
Right.
and I have friends that have done that kind of model with their businesses, maybe you just build, you're really just investing. You're not looking to kind of rush to market and launch a big thing, but you're really just trying to test some little core thing out and license that off in a B2B purposes. But really your long-term vision is that eventually you're going to build that into this other dream, right? So it's really navigating the survival aspect of the business, so that you don't ever want to be up against the wall. Up against the wall means you just running out of money, and then you're like, where am I going to get more money? Because if I don't get more money, then I can't pay for all these costs of employees and offices and whatever you have. And then you basically have to shut down, and your investor is going to say, well, then we want to sell everything you have and just get back whatever we can. And so you're literally just going to go kaput because you ran out of money. So how can you architect those early days so that you almost have no burn rate? And it means, of course, you're going to build very little. Mm-hmm. Of course, you're going to go very slow, and but it's not always about speed. I think it's often about survival.
I really love that, because I think in today's day and world, a lot of taking VC capital, for example, inherently means you have to move at a certain speed.
Yeah.
And you're sitting there telling us, sometimes it's okay to go slow.
Yeah, I think it is. I think there's certain markets that are clearly winner takes all. And so if you, in the days of Uber, if you were not Uber and you're not fast moving, then you're going to lose. But I think there's many markets that are not winner takes all, many markets. And it's many markets where it's more about surviving and doing it well. You could even argue Google. Google is not the first search engine, right? There's so many examples of someone who just sort of sat back and thought, how can this be done really, really well? And I think I like those kind of startups, because this whole kind of land grab, winner takes all thing, it's just even more crazy risk that can all end miserably. I just heard a podcast interview the other day where they said, look, Instacart is basically Webvan years later, right? And you're like, wow. So Webvan had only thought about a way to survive to the day they became Instacart, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, thank you so much. I feel like I could speak about this all day long with you. I really do hope I see the Shazam story on Netflix sometime soon. It would be one I would be happy to watch. And I wish you the very best. I know you've got some startups that you're starting on as well, again, and more impact-driven work. I wish you the best in all of that.
Thanks for having me, Erica.
Yeah, thank you.